I'm going to tell you why you need to buy one of these. Well, the answer's really easy. I'm going to tell you why you should buy an RB1 Odyssey. Hello guys, and welcome to my 2005 Honda Odyssey RB1. Isn't she a beauty? In fact, this one's a he. This is called Noddy the Oddie, and we're here today to talk about it. So this one's on 72,000 miles. It's an RB1L CVT. We're not going to go into the differences too much. We're going to talk about the sort of Odyssey RB1 broadly. I know this isn't an absolute. We'll touch on slightly why you'd have the absolute over one of these, but if you can't afford it or you want an L or whatever it might be, then this is an L. Very rare, even rarer than the absolute. I don't think I've ever seen another L in the UK. I've seen a few more, 2, 3, 4 maybe on eBay, but I've seen none at all. So if you want even something a little bit more exclusive than the absolute, you've got the L. And here we are today. So this glorious car is on 72,000 miles and it's barely even running, let's be honest. And I'm going to walk you around it and tell you why you should buy an Odyssey. But first of all, we'll just discuss the quick main differences between the L and the absolute, so we can get that out of the way. And then we can just discuss the car itself and why you should get an Odyssey as a whole. So guys, the Odyssey RB1 came in four main different flavours. So we have the Odyssey S, the M, the L, and the absolute. Now the absolute is the top spec model. Now because this is Japanese JDM imported over here, the specs don't necessarily mean a lot because they're all over the place. Spec levels are all over the place, equipment's all over the place. There's certain bits of kit that I've got on this that isn't on the absolute, but the absolute's the better car. But it's, yeah. So let's just talk about the basics. The main difference that splits the L apart from the absolute is this is a K24A1 with 160 horsepower, and that is mated to a CVT box with a sort of fake 7-speed system, manual shifting system, or the CVT. And then the absolute is a actual 5-speed box, and that is a K24A2, which is 200 bhp. And obviously that is what you get. That is the main difference on the vehicle. Now when it comes to the absolute will tend to have higher spec. The absolute will come with the absolute kit on it, front lip, side skirts, rear, sometimes a spoiler, and there's other versions we can go into like Mugen, etc, etc, but we're just here to focus primarily on this L today. So that is the two main differences. Now the L actually does come very well spec'd, and the L has, as far as I'm aware and what I've seen, has only one type of interior trim, which makes it very different to the rest. Now we'll discuss that in just a moment about the interior trim, but you'll notice an L because it has a certain trim type on the interior. Now I've had this now for 4 months and it has been an absolute pleasure to own. Not only has it got one of Honda's most iconic and very reliable engines, it's also a Honda, which as we know is also very reliable as a brand. And it's nice to see these JDM imported versions over here. In my opinion, they are much better looking than the American counterpart, which looks more like a bus. So we're going to discuss today why you should buy yourself an absolute generally. I'll touch upon bits about the L, but we're just talking about it generally. So all those people in there saying absolute's better, blah, 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 blah. We're not here to compare, we're here just to talk about the Odyssey as a whole. Doesn't matter whether this is an SML or absolute, we're just going to talk about the car through and through. Now while we're sat here, tell me, isn't that one gorgeous 7-seater? We'll go and check the ass out in a moment. Please don't get too excited. But this is an amazingly good looking 7-seater. Now, this has a facelift version called an RB2. There's some slight spec changes. The rear end is slightly different on the RB2. We'll discuss that when we're there. On the front end, I don't think there's too much of a difference in the bumpers. So if you do see an RB1 and RB2, they are the same vehicle. Obviously the RB2 is just facelift, and then they have the RB3 as well, which is still I think the same body, but again a much more revised front end and shape of the vehicle. Interior is fairly similar, all that sort of thing. So the RB1, I have to admit, and a lot of people will say, is the best looking of the bunch. We'll go around the back in a minute and we'll show you that as well. And even in the L, in the most basic form of exterior body kits, which is basically it has no exterior body kits apart from the L does, or is the only one as far as I'm aware that has the chrome strips going around the car. which I quite like. It is very basic in body. Now obviously bear in mind the grille on this vehicle isn't stock. Again, very beautiful. They will tend to come with stock grills, although a variety of them won't, so just bear in mind that isn't a stock feature. But what I'm trying to say with this car is it's very good looking, and as you can just tell from the front already, there's a lot of flexibility with making the car how you want it to be. There's a lot of JDM goodies you can import over for this car to really make the Odyssey stand out amongst the rest of them. Not that it already does, because you are going to be the only one, at least within your local area, that probably owns one. So down to the looks, it ticks all the freaking boxes. And let's talk about the drivability and the general accessibility specification of the car. So there we are, the beautiful back end of the Odyssey. Yet again, you would never think that this car is a 7-seater. The dimensions are very interesting. Now, I'm not very tall, I will admit, all right? I'm not very tall. So I am with shoes on, actually, roughly 5'8", 5'9", and a push. Maybe on tiptoes, a little bit more. But as you can see, this car is very low slung. Now, a lot of 7-seater MPVs are always very high van-like vehicles with sliding doors. Now, this is a conventional 5-door, open-door vehicle, like so, which already makes it, as an MPG, slightly different. Now, like I was saying about the height, it sort of has a profile of an estate, and it looks just amazing. It really is. Now, don't be fooled by the dimensions. This may, again, not be very tall, but these are quite long. They're almost just under 5 meters in length. So they're quite a long car, and it just goes. It's just super great. Now, because of the design, you've got practically almost 90 degrees opening on the front, which is good for child seats. And again, on the rear, super wide accessible doors. You find with some of these other vehicles of this kind that some of them, because of the design, do suffer with the amount the door opens. And equally, the space in there and the accessibility for space is just incredible. We'll get onto the interior and bits about that in a moment, but it's super accessible, especially if you've got young children you want to put into a chair or something like that. Now, just finishing on the looks before we move on, as you can see, again, there's so much customization. We've got a set of Nissan 350 rays on here. They supplement the car perfectly. You can see we've got a set of aftermarket rear lights, a nice set of exhaust tips with a beautiful exhaust going through. There's a lot of functionality with the car and a lot of flexibility what you can do with it. And as I was mentioning, just to finish off with the L as well, you can tell it's an L because it has the chrome strips all around the vehicle, which I think look spectacular with the rest of the car as it sits. So what we have got here is we have indeed got a 7-seater, 2 in the front, 3 in the centre, 2 in the rear. Now, you could run this as a very decent 5-seater by putting the rear seats down, and you could also run it as a van, or a mobile bed, whatever you want to call it. I put a photo here now of a double bed in the back of here. Incredible. Very functional if that's what you want to use it for. But this car has just so many functions. It is excellent. Now, because my car is still full, my boot is full of bits, and I can't really show you the complete functionality of the car. I'm going to have to put some inserts over my face, which I'm sure you won't complain about, just to discuss some of the elements of the car. So as we said, you can run it completely as a van, you can run it as a 5-seater with a massive boot, or you can run it with as a 7-seater with still a very decent sized boot. Now, I'll come on and show you the boot now anyway. It's just full with my crap. But you've still got, even with all 7 seats up, you've still got enough space there, I would say, for a good couple of suitcases, plus a bit of extra baggage that you can put in the foot areas and bits like that as well. So still very practical, even with the 7-seat configuration. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a photo just so you can see. This now will be a photo of the car with the rear seats down. As you can see, you've got ample space for probably 6 to 8 massive bags in there very easily. And as we can see now, the photo without the bedding on is now the seats down completely. You can see, I can tell you now, you can fit immeasurable amounts of stuff in there. Silly stuff in there. It is like owning a small van. It really is. So when it comes to sort of storage and practicality in that sense, it is blimming perfect. It is such an awesome, well-made car, and we're going to jump in the interior in just a moment. So just to discuss on the L, it's not as well equipped as the Absolute. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk to you about the exterior upgrades you can have on the car if you're lucky enough to buy one or spec one up like that. So we have this car here, and I fitted a aftermarket rear camera to it. Now this one did have it on there, but the system doesn't work. The radio is useless. So at the end, I'll do a little warning about things you need to look out for on the RB1 as well. Obviously, we need to have the goods and the bads, but there's so much good that outweighs any bad you're going to get at all. So, on these, you can get spec'd front and rear parking sensors. Excellent. Rear reverse camera. Perfect. That's what you need. Now, on the tailgate, as we're stood here, you can get the option on these, which is very good for the age. You can get a locking boot with the buttons. So, obviously, you'd open it up, press it, and it will close itself. An auto pad tailgate, that is very, very smart. Now on the front end and down the side, obviously you can get your tints, your privacy tints. I think all of them come with these wind deflectors, which are just so super useful. And if you're very lucky enough to find one in an RB1, probably more on RB2, you can find keyless entry with the keyless start as well, which is a great feature. So a lot of external features that are very, very beneficial to the car. Including the sunroof option is there for some as well, and obviously this roof hasn't got fixed rails on it. As far as I'm aware, they never came from factory with rails on, as far as I'm aware, but I know you can clamp a decent size roof box to that with no issues whatsoever. Here we are then, guys. So functionality, there is so much of it. So this is the centre set of seats. Now these are reclinable on the bases here, and they also slide forwards and backwards, so you can adjust the leg room as well as how far back you're reclined in the seat. So I'm going to show you, as a very average, not going to say small, human being, absolutely oodles of room, like oodles of room. Now this row could easily seat people that are 6 foot tall, not a problem at all, because of the adjustment you've got. It's super easy. Now when it comes to actually splitting this down here, yeah, again, it's super easy. The base of the seat just comes up and that folds away. On the handle you pull, obviously you get your headrest down, and that folds away like so, and that becomes part of your flat load and storage that goes onto the back, and it is a completely, pretty much practically flat load as well. Very easy again to reassemble, like so. Don't forget your seatbelt. It's just such a simple and practical laid out interior. So we're in the passenger seat again. Oodles of room. You've got a nice little armrest here hidden behind my belly and the door, and it's just super roomy. It's just a nice place to be. I'll grab the camera in just a moment and bring it onto my person so we can see again even better the cockpit and how it sits, but it's just such a nice place to be. So I'm sat in the back of the Odyssey to showcase you the rear seats. Now again, it's a nice place to be. Bear in mind, this is with the seats furthest back, so you can see there's not too much leg room, but with these seats moved further forwards, there's a practical room here, really practical usable room. Cup holders on either side. Now this is just, I can't describe to you. This is just, here where I'm sat, it is just so comfortable in here. It is just lovely. Now I wouldn't suggest that the back is going to be, you know, excellent for anyone over 6 foot, if I'm honest with you, but as the car goes, it is really excellent. And you know, even if you were over 6 foot, you could probably go in here for a small amount of time, but for longer journeys you want to keep your 6 footers and stuff in the front rows just to save that from happening. But yeah, just look, there is oodles of room. It's so far back from the front here as well, but yeah, look, and there is room for 2 decent sized passengers in the rear here as well. Absolutely plenty of room, and obviously because these move forwards and backwards on sliders as well, you've got accessible room for feet as well. Now while we're here in the back, one bit of spec you want to look for on these, it doesn't come all of these, is the rear roof heaters. They've got their own climate controls in the centre there, which I think is really cool, so you can have a different temperature left and right, front, and the rear can be different as well, all controlled by the passengers in the centre here, and it just gives just a bit of class and higher spec, and it just gives more comfortability for those that are sat in the back as well on long journeys. You can either close them, you know, have them facing you, facing away, all the rest of it. I just think that's a really smart feature. to have on the car. It's beautiful in the summer with the AC because you can cool the entire vehicle the whole way through. So for me, I would say actually the most comfortable position in this car, apart from driving it, is actually this rear space is really, really comfortable. And actually all the rows are just great, they really are. Now what I forgot to mention was we're talking about the L and what interior trim the L has that makes it easily noticeable, but also very different from the other sort of trims that other vehicles have. And you can probably guess around me now what that is. So the trim that the L comes in, regardless of whatever L you get, it will be this trim, and it is this sort of creamy cloth, which in this case in this car is actually very beautiful and has been kept fairly clean for the most part all over. And then it also comes with this fake wood trim, which is so sort of 90s, early 2000s English Jaguar, all that sort of stuff. And obviously the black, so it runs through the cream on the roof. The steering wheel, you can see there in the distance, has got, which you'll see in a moment, we're going to go in the front, has got more of the wood effect on the steering wheel. Yeah, it's just, this is the trim you get in the L. It is very different. Whereas what you would normally expect in most of the Odysseys is a set trim colour, i.e. grey leather, i.e. black leather, i.e. black cloth, like that. So that is about it that makes the L slightly different as a specification. And we're going to jump in the front now and look at the front because we haven't been in the driver's seat yet, and then we're going to have a talk about the engine, and then we'll do a little drive around and discuss the performance, and then we'll just do the pros and cons to finish, because it's just an amazing car. You got to buy one. So here we are, guys, in we get. Oh, now what I can say is the feeling of instant comfort. It is just amazing in here. It's really nice to be in here. Just to mention, this one has a super uncommon opening storage compartment armrest. A lot of them just have the 2 armrests here, which is quite different. This storage cubby here has a handle, so this can be folded down to fit longer items through the centre. And this is just the dash. Mine features a Bluetooth speaker because the radio is very temperamental, and we'll discuss about the radio at the end in the pros and cons. But the CVT does have an eco mode, which I will admit does work very, very well. And we'll start the car up in a minute so you can have a proper look at it. But here's the interior. So again, for specs up front, this has got the heated lower screen, which heats your wipers up. Nice little function. I don't think I've seen many Absolutes with that anyway, which is a very cool little function. And that's really about all that's different from mine. Mine has a sat-nav unit. Now, if you look at these cars, they have about 50 types of different sat-nav units on these. They are just crazy. There's just all over the place with the different ones here. Some that come out, some that go in, some that's a single radio. It's just so many, I can't list them all. So you will see there and then that there are a lot of those types of sat-navs going around. As you can see, this screen's not stock either. That is my reversing screen I've installed because of my rear window. As you can see, we can tell it's an import. We've got the Japanese writing, and we have an old tax disc there as well, I think. So all of these run off of this gear stick, this shifter with the selectable gears, obviously park, reverse, neutral, drive. This one has an L. Some of them are called D3, and this is basically it puts the engine into a position of higher torque for if you've got weight in the car or you're going up a hill. And it's also, if you're going down a steep hill, you can flick it into this and it will gear the car up higher to try and slow you down. So that's quite a cool feature, maybe more for towing or for a fully laden car. And we do have a switch across manual mode on here, which is a 7-speed or a sort of computerized 7-speed system here. Obviously the Absolute has a 5. So just to finish off with the steering wheel as well, the L has the wood effect and a slightly different steering wheel than the rest of the Odysseys that I've seen as well. So the L's are slightly kind of different model to the rest, but they're all sort of unique in their own ways. But yeah, this is the cockpit of the car, really. I'm going to break my steering wheel sideways. But there we are. They're very cool little dials. They have blue centres. I think it looks really good. And there we are. This one, just to show you, look guys, is on let's have a look. There we go, 117,000 kilometers, which is roughly about 72,000 miles. And that is the cockpit in it. It's just such a great little place to be. Just to say as well, in terms of spec that hasn't been mentioned as well, I'm trying to work my way in order here. So these all, I think pretty much all of them come with the xenon lights that are actually very good. This one has the heated folding mirrors. I'm assuming that's probably quite continuous for the range, and I have auto lights and auto wipers. So you got to think, for a car that was sort of designed in the early 2000s, 2001, 2002, the specification is really, really good. Very high spec for what the vehicle is. It's very, very impressive. I must say the sound system on this is just incredible. Not that mine works too often because my radio doesn't work, but when it does work occasionally, because it's sort of a part-time radio, it does sound really, really good. So that is sort of my walk around and talk about the vehicle as it is. So I'm going to get on the road and do a little drive around with you guys. Do bear in mind I have an aftermarket exhaust, so these stock are so quiet. So don't be expecting that sort of noise to come out of your Honda if you're buying one, because it is quite loud. So don't be put off by that, because it is. Now, just to mention as well, this car is on coilovers and it actually rides softer. Very much softer actually than it did when it was stock. So you will find the stock setup is actually quite a nice stiff drive. And the thing is with this car, again, that sets it out really fundamentally from a lot of other MPVs, is it drives like a car, even though it is a car, I guess, but it drives like a car, not an MPV. It drives like a much smaller vehicle, you know, and with the double wishbone suspension that this vehicle has, it's very comfortable anyway. But these coilovers actually, because they're a singular spring, are actually very, very comfortable indeed. So we're going to talk about the drivability and all that sort of stuff now. So to drive, guys, absolutely blissful. Before we get into the sort of engine and all the performance and that sort of thing, visibility is so great with this car. I will say that the front bar, or front A pillar that comes down the front here, can block your view, sort of, I would say, what, like this sort of side here, slightly. But apart from that, it ain't bad at all. The seats in the back are sat or seated in such a way that even with the headrests up, they're still sat quite low below the window, so you've got a lot of visibility behind you as well, which is important if you've got a model that hasn't got parking sensors or something like that. So yeah, I'm comfortable. The driving position is nice. You've got the electric seat on the driver's side, at least in this one anyway, not all of them do, which gives you enough adjustment to get comfortable. I do find in this car that you can't adjust, or at least with this one, you can't adjust the height of the seat. So I do find sometimes I'm sat a little bit too sort of on the car rather than in it sometimes, which is a bit of a weird sensation. But no, it's not bad. It really isn't. And it's just a very nice place to be. It is very pleasant. You know, for a Honda, for not the world's most expensively built car, and considering it is also 17 years old, this one, the build quality has actually been very good. And when I've had to work on the car, it's been very simplistic to use and to work with as well. You know, and there's no real rattles or knocks from the engine, any of the components, any of the bodywork, anything. It is really actually a very solid car, which probably goes part and part with lower mileage, but even still, it's really excellent. As you can see, I try to drive my car conservatively so you can hear how quiet it would just be. This quiet, it'd be less, you wouldn't hear anything, but this is just the sort of quietness you get. It's lovely. Then you get this. Yeah, a little bit louder. So the CVT box, in my experience, it's super smooth. You don't feel it changing between the gears or sort of changing its whatever it's doing anyway. Obviously the CVT doesn't hold much power, you know, so it's not going to be as fast as the Absolute by any means, but it's still, with the 160 horsepower, it still leaves people, or leaves passengers, feeling like it's more than 160 horsepower, which is good. The CVT, just plant your foot and it will just sit there, bring the revs up and hold it there. It's a very weird, very, very weird sensation. I've never owned a CVT before, and in my opinion, I would say, actually, yeah, go and buy CVT. I wouldn't say in any way, in my experience, it's been unreliable, or impractical. It's just easy, really. The manual system is quite nice because you can slot it in and you can sort of feel like you have a little bit of control over the gearing, and it will let you rev up on the CVT to 6,000, which is rather weak. I know with the Absolute it will let you rev all the way to 7,000, which is a much more enjoyable experience. But I'll find somewhere just a moment to give you it revving up, and you'll hear the engine does rev really nice. It does pick up really, really well. It's a little bit slow off the line because obviously all your power band, even though it hasn't got the Vtec you want, all the power band is still up at the top. I think it's like 5,000 revs is where you get the most power out of the car. Like this, like all petrols. And the 2.4 is mated very well to this engine, to this car, and to this setup. And the CVT, I would probably say, isn't going to be as nippy or potentially as quick as the 5-speed box, but it certainly is enough for what you need. Even with carrying people, it still pulls very well and pulls very hard. Now, in terms of fuel economy and bits like that, and reliability, I wouldn't say that either gearbox is any less reliable than one another. I would imagine the traditional gearbox is probably even more reliable down the line. But the CVT, like I said to you, has caused me no issues, and I'm sure is a very reliable system on this car. And obviously, when it comes to drivability, you've still got your manual sort of shifts. It still lets you rev up alright, and it still goes alright. So it's just it's a well-performing car, and it's mated well to it. And it's a shame that actually, as far as I'm aware, they never made any manuals of these, because I know a lot of people do complain about that. But if you do have to have the CVT, because of your budget and you can't afford you know, the 5-speed absolute, I still don't think you'd be disappointed with this setup at all. Also, just to mention, I can't comment on the fuel economy or fuel efficiency of the absolute with the auto box, but I can tell you that with the CVT, I am returning fairly good MPG amounts. This is also only running on non-premium petrol, so E10, which is apparently fine for these. And I would say on the long run I'm getting between 30 and 35 mpg, which is respectable for a heavy 2.4 and naturally aspirated car. And around town I'm probably getting more between 15 and early 20s, which is not really very good, but you know what you expect for the setup. So in terms of buying one, tax is 250 or so for the year. You know, running costs with, at least with the CVT that I can comment on, is right, is actually fine. And this ends up being ULEZ exempt everywhere, bar Bristol as it currently stands, London, and Birmingham. So just so you're aware, if you are buying one, they are not completely exempt. At least the RB1 isn't completely exempt anyway, which is a bit of a shame. But you've got all this that I have mentioned already, and the fact that when you're driving down the road, you look like an absolute G. You look like a sick person, not sick ill, but sick. Like, look at that guy, he's like sweet. Do you know what I mean? You look like a cool guy. You look like a cool dad, a cool granddad, whatever you might be, driving one. And you know, at the end of the day, it's just, you can't get better for a car than this, in the sense of what it offers all round. Everything I've mentioned combined together, it's just, yeah, it's just good. It is just really, really good. If you want a reliable, sensible, good-looking, great daily vehicle or family car, in fact, this is absolutely excellent for anyone who wants to own something and be a little bit different. Here we go. So I'm going to take it out of the eco mode. We're going to hear it rev up now. Ready? So you're going to plant your foot. See, it revs. That's just sat at 5,000 revs. That was good. Smooth. Very, very smooth. It just revs its way up to just over 5,000, which is obviously the maximum VHP achievable for this sort of setup on this car, and it just holds it there and you just go. It is pretty nippy. So guys, things to look out for on any Odyssey. Now, there are a variety of issues with all cars, and I can tell you now, the Odyssey is very well known for being super reliable. A, it's Honda, it's a super reliable brand, and B, the K24 is a very super reliable engine, most of which run well over 200,000 miles with literally no issues. Now, things to check. Now, what I've noticed the most from the forums about the Odysseys is actually what is currently going on with mine. And that is this. The stock radios are all very different from factory, so just be prepared. They're all slightly different in their own ways. But the important thing to remember is that a lot of them do have or are plagued with running issues. So it's very highly recommended that you remove the old Japanese unit and reinstall a decent Android, Apple CarPlay, the radio works once in a blue moon, and sometimes I have a Japanese person speaking to me through the door and I can't turn it off. So that's my current climate and situation with my radio. So it's fairly annoying, but it's not really an issue. But just be aware, in the Odysseys, check the radios work, because they can be very temperamental. Now, as we progress into other things, rust. Now, the imports are exceptionally good for rust. Mine was literally pristine, obviously a low mileage car, but just be aware on your high mileage cars to look out for rust, because these aren't undersealed, or there's very little undersealed, or well, very little underbody protection from factory. So be prepared that there will be premature rust and wear, just because of the UK roads and how salty they get in the winter. So the main areas for concern are up underneath the side skirts. Make sure you remove those and check them, and up underneath, when you take the rear arch out, up underneath onto the rear subframe, along basically above where the back of the exhaust sits. It builds up in the pockets up in there and can start rusting through the inside of the chassis up in the corner. So make sure you take off that rear arch, drop those back boxes down, and really get up in that area all around behind the fuel tank. That is where the rust will go, and we'll just end up rusting straight through where it sits there and then. Now, in relation to any other issues, these cars do tend to go through brake pads and discs quite often, just due to the weight of the automatic gearbox in them. Just be aware that at least for the standard Odyssey front brakes, at least, that they have a specific pad that is Odyssey only based. You can source them from Honda, but just be aware you can't use any old pads. You've got to source the correct ones for the Odyssey. Some owners just tend to replace the disc setup for a set off of a Type R, you know, FN2 or a Accord, something like that, just because it's just easier when it comes to maintenance work on the brakes, just to replace them with European specification brakes and bits like that. It's just easy to source the parts, and the brake pads can be a problem and are a problem. Also, another thing that's very difficult to source with this car as well is the wheel bearings are a problem. Now, not that they're a problem at all, because they're just wheel bearings and they'll go when they go. I haven't seen too much about them really going, it's just a general maintenance thing. But when they do go, they're incredibly difficult to source, so they're another thing you want to really make sure you spend the time researching into. Now, while we're discussing about suspension, the drop links also tend to go quite well on these as well, so they're quite a common thing to go on the front and rear. And basically, the Honda Accord front drop links fit, they're slightly longer, but they fit absolutely fine. And the Honda CRVs, their rear drop links fit on there as well. So just be prepared that those are the two European vehicles you'd have to use parts from. And overall, for sourcing parts, actually, it's not very bad. It's actually very decent. The only real issue you'll find with sourcing parts is actual Odyssey body panels and Odyssey bits like that. All the sort of suspension components, engine components, are all normally taken off of European variants. I mean, the engine at 2.4 is in vehicles globally, so sourcing parts for that is very, very easy. Now, in terms of leaks, there's nothing that I've known on these that is too prominent. Just be aware, I had it on mine, there is a spool valve filter that sits on the spool valve, which sits on the back left hand sort of rear quarter of the engine. Just be aware that they do tend to go through. Mine had gone through and was leaking down the back of the engine until fixed. But just be prepared, it's not an expensive fix. I think the filter's about £9, but just again be aware that that is somewhere they leak from. So when you're checking, check from the back. I did have a diff seal leak as well, but generally Honda's fairly well renowned for actually just leaking normally from the valve covers, but mine's absolutely fine. So just check around for leaks. But normally, if you've got one down the back of the engine, don't be alarmed. It's normally just that little spool valve seal, which is about £9 plus whatever you want to pay or do to fix it. It's not too much of a job. And I think that is really all I can say. Now, with the CVT boxes as well as the 5-speed boxes, more importantly the CVTs, because they're slightly more technical of a gearbox, just make sure that there is a good history of maintenance being done to the gearbox, so regular oil changes. When they're hitting around 100,000 miles, you want to make sure they've had a service as well. And whenever you're testing a vehicle, just test the gearbox works properly. It's fairly obvious stuff, but they base to begin modifying or enjoying as a family car. It is a very, very decent car overall. The only thing to mention as well about the interior, apart from the radio, is just be aware that the arms on these, the armrests, especially on the door card, they tend to rub through quite a bit. It's just because of the seating position you're in. So just be aware that sometimes the leather material or material on the door card will have worn through. So just check around the interior and make sure you check that out when you buy the car. Again, it's not going to be too difficult to source a door card for the vehicle, but it depends entirely on what material it is. Now, if you've got a cream one like mine, you're going to struggle to source one. So just be aware and check out obviously the driver's door and the driver's armrest for wear, because that's where they do wear through on the interior. But overall, the rest of the interior is perfect. It's almost like it was when it's new. It's really crisp in here, and you know, even the interior and the seats is great. So again, it's just very minor things that don't really affect the car, but they're just something you want to check up and keep an eye on when you're buying one if you want it to be absolutely perfect.